push decisions down as low as they can be made. So empower people to make their own decisions whenever and wherever possible. And one of the ways to enable that is to be really clear about your intention. In other words, what's the big picture and outcome that we're actually seeking here?
It's both an honour and privilege to have someone who has led from the skies, survived the weight of silence, and now speaks boldly about the battles too many still fight in silence. As a former Australian Army helicopter pilot, commanding officer and veteran of multiple operational deployments, Kevin Humphreys has stories that need to be told and insights that need to be shared. Transformation and purpose. It's a reminder that leadership isn't about control, it's about connection, and that asking for help might just be the strongest move you can make.
Don't expect everyone to be happy with every decision that you make, and don't take it personally, because we don't necessarily have all of the information ourselves. As I said, when you've got the intent, when you've got the end state, that helps to narrow people's focus, but it still doesn't mean you're going to get the right decision every time.
Kevin, welcome to Share.
Hey Steve, how are you, mate? Good to see you again.
It's awesome to catch up, and looking forward to picking your brain and getting some of your insights into today's episode.
Absolutely, looking forward to it.
Now, there's a lot of subjects I think we're going to, or very lot of relevant subjects that we're going to kind of cover, and some topics that are pretty important. But I wanted to start by setting the scene a little bit by you just describing what was your most defining moment in your journey that shaped you to the man you are today.
Ooh, the most defining moment. To paraphrase Joseph Campbell from The Hero's Journey, it was the cave I dare not enter. And that cave for me was speaking publicly about a secret that I'd held for many, many years. And I honestly thought the world was going to swallow me whole, and the opposite happened. The world embraced me and lifted me up. But I was absolutely convinced that it was going to be the end of the end of my life as I knew it, and paradoxically it was, but not in the way that I thought.
Yeah, wow.
So it really was the end of me as I was, and created a whole new version of me, which has just been incredible. And interesting. I've never thought about it in that way. That question really brought out that one. Otherwise, would have been a whole bunch of other things about growing up and parent influence, and then military missions and whatever else. But no, all of those pale in insignificance compared to this one event.
Yeah. And can you share more around that secret, what you were holding on to?
Yeah. That I'd contemplated suicide, that I had mental illness, that I wasn't coping, and had a nervous breakdown, and 9 months off work trying to get myself right again to get back to work, just to be back being functional again, let alone actually living and thriving in my life again. I really thought that, trying to find the right words for it. In the military, and I know, because we'll talk about all this stuff, but in the military, I think the military and emergency services and a number of other professions, they self-select proud people. And in the military in particular, the notion of pride gets metaphorically bashed into you from the moment you get off the trucks, or before you get on the buses to go to your recruit training or your officer training or whatever. And as soon as you get off the buses, be proud of your country, be proud of yourself, be proud of your team, be proud of your unit, be proud, be proud, be proud. And at the same time, there is also a message of do not ever go jack on your mates. And to go jack on your mates is the number one immutable sin in the military. And for good reason when you're on the battlefield, right? And I firmly believe that me contemplating suicide and me having a breakdown, and just months after I'd been in Afghanistan, leading and working with a bunch of incredible men and women, flying missions, doing all kinds of stuff, and now I'm convulsing on the ground, and I can't help myself, let alone anybody else. I honestly felt as though that was the biggest jackass act of all, and to, as I said, to go jack in the military is an immutable sin. You just don't do it. So yeah, it was really, really hard for me to admit that, and to be able to talk through all that publicly.
Yeah. And it's interesting, the generational influences that, this whole, you've got to be tough, you've got to be strong, you can't show weakness, you can't show vulnerability. And I was doing a talk this week on mental health, and I actually said, from a generational basis, these days I actually think if you want to be tough, if you want to be manly, the toughest thing you can do is put your hand up and say, I need help.
Yeah. And I'll add to that from an operational context, that it is absolutely one of the hardest things to do is put your hand up and say help. And from an operational context, we need to understand when to do it. And so there's this real juxtaposition almost between the hard line the hard element of asking for help, but also knowing that crying in the cockpit is not okay, right? When you're actually on mission, on the task, now is not the time to put your hand up and say, I'm not coping, I need some help, right? Now, I know it's not as black and white as that, but from a conceptual point of view, that is what it is, right? We can't have, when lives are on the line, you have to be able to carry through the mission, right? And then afterwards, if there was something there that really needs to be attended to, then absolutely. But when you're in the thick of a mission, whatever that mission is, then you do need to be able to continue on. But and so therefore you need to make a hard decision earlier, potentially, to identify that you need some help earlier. If not, then you get on with it and you get on with the job, and then get some help at the end of the job.
Can I ask you, how long were you holding that secret? How long were you, wearing that weight on your shoulders?
Yeah. So leading up to the breakdown itself, it had been building for a period of 5 years, and potentially a bit longer, but definitely for 5 years. And then after I had the breakdown and suicidal ideation and all the rest of it, that was then 7 years after that. So yeah, it was a fair period of time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to get into obviously your recovery and coming through that. But, for people listening, I'd really like you to give them a bit of a snapshot on your career. What led, what were the things that kind of, I suppose, were put in place and happened through your journey that led to that?
Yeah. So it starts off as just an average working class kid, growing up in the Blue Mountains, and I really got interested in the army, and as a little kid, and then as a teenager, pimply faced teenager, watching rescue helicopters fly overhead, and then in year 11 I found out the army had helicopters, and so I was one of those really lucky kids that knew exactly what they wanted to do when they left school. Exactly. And I was also one of those really lucky kids who was able to achieve it. And so went off, did officer training, and then got on pilot's course. And there was a 70% failure rate on pilot's course, and I went through and managed to scrape through the first part of the training, and then ended up doing pretty well at the back end of the training. And so started my 20-year Army career flying Black Hawk and Chinook helicopters. That's those two big ones up the top up there, around most parts of Australia and various parts of the world. I was a flight instructor in the US and for a period of time on the Chinook, and then had humanitarian operations in Papua New Guinea, and then a string of operational deployments, multiple deployments to East Timor, and then one to Iraq, and then one to Afghanistan. Four, 2 mid-length ones and 2 short ones to Afghanistan. And all of those deployments showed me, some of the best and the worst of humanity, and in different ways, different places, different times. And we quite often talk about how dangerous the deployments are for the military. But the other thing that we often lose sight of is how dangerous the home life is, right? So in my 20 years in the Army, we actually lost 34 ADF personnel to helicopter accidents. And that's not vehicle accidents or weapon accidents or airplane accidents. That's just helicopter accidents. 34 men and women didn't go home. And I had my fair share of near misses with those. Myself and 6 other men almost didn't go home. We had a mid-air collision with a boat on a regular Tuesday afternoon in Townsville. It was otherwise a completely normal day, and 7 of us almost didn't go home. So, the training environment is always a risky environment, and then when we get on operations, it just gets more risky, more hazardous. And so I'd had a number of experiences along the way, but it actually wasn't bullets or rockets or cliff edges or the flying side that brought me undone. Unfortunately for me, it was a toxic culture. For me, it was, and not the whole culture, right? Not the whole organization. When I was immersed in it, I was starting to believe it was the whole organization. With the benefit of and the clarity of hindsight, I could see that it was small pockets and individuals in the organization who happened to be in key positions. And unfortunately, I just happened to hit a string of them. So that's what really brought me undone, was the interpersonal side of things, and a few key individuals who, not particularly pleasant and not particularly honourable.
Yeah. Do you think that, obviously when you came to that point where you were convulsing on the floor, you just, you kind of hit rock bottom, right? I'm guessing that was your rock bottom moment.
Oh yeah. That was in a substrata, mate. That was, apart from actually going ahead with the suicide attempt, which I didn't, I stopped myself short. But yeah, that's the only way I could have possibly gone lower.
Do you think that the weight of all those events and things in your career did contribute to it, though?
Oh, 100%. Absolutely. The military does an incredible job of taking ordinary people and breaking them down and then building them back up again so that the extraordinary becomes ordinary. And they also do it so that the military, think of the military as a machine, right? And the military is a mega machine. And in this mega machine are a whole bunch of major and minor and micro components, cogs and gears and pulleys and, whatever you want to call it. And every individual person is a micro-cog in the mega machine. And so, when one of those micro-cogs, when a machine stops working, something in the mechanics has broken down, right? And so when one of those micro-cogs stops working the way the machine needs it to work, they need to be able to take out that micro-cog and put in an identical micro-cog so the machine can keep working again. And that's not to speak disparagingly about the military. That's to say that's how it needs to work for the military to do its job on behalf of the people of our nation, right? And so when you get to realize that we are little more than a micro-cog in the military machine, you can understand why when one of those micro-cogs isn't working anymore, it needs to be replaced as quickly as possible with another one that is exactly the same shape, form, function, that it can keep the machine going. And along the way, just like any machine, there is wear and tear. And that might be because of combat zones. It might be because of really arduous training. It might be because of toxic work environment, or wherever the case may be. So all of those pieces absolutely play a part.
Yeah. And when you look back to your military career, what sticks in your mind as some real, like the most intense or defining moments in your deployments?
Wow. There's a whole bunch of them actually. I'll try to get them in some kind of order, but so in I guess East Timor, I guess the humanitarian operations over in Papua New Guinea to start with, that was the first taste of seeing the military. I'd done some humanitarian tasks in Australia in various ways, but doing that over in PNG was the first task of seeing real civilian population desperation. And so, we fly out to these remote villages. It was during a period of drought up in Papua New Guinea. And so where the Chinooks filled with 10 and 20, 10 kilo, 10 litre, 10 and 20 kilo, 20 litre bags, buckets, or not buckets, jeepers creepers, plastic containers of rice, oil, and flour, and occasionally some other bits and pieces, but they were the main kinds of things that were going out there. And so we might have 8 tons of this stuff on the back of the Chinook that we land somewhere, and there's only a crew of 4 guys on board the aircraft, and we've got to manually offload all of these hundreds of items. And there were a couple of places where we went to where the locals were just rushing the aircraft and just swamping the aircraft. And they were, 1, out of desperation, 2, out of the want to help as well. And so, so that was that. And go to East Timor now, and there was real desperation for the part of the East Timorese, and to see the squalid conditions that a number of them were living in because of the way things had been with the Indonesians. And then from there, some of the flying around both of those places, Papua New Guinea and East Timor, was just absolutely breathtaking. Then jump across to Iraq, and it was before I was allocated to a headquarters, and we're in this building that it just had a whole wall was filled up with screens, and we have these things called Blue Force trackers, which are pieces of equipment that identify on a moving map not only where you are, but where other friendly forces are. They come up as little blue icons. And so here we are looking at this screen with the map of Iraq, and there are just blue icons. This is just before the war started, right? And so there are blue icons just all around, not quite all around, but in some concentrated areas on the outside of the border of Iraq, all poised, ready. And you can see other aircraft in holding patterns and various things just ready. And then when the whistle blew, metaphorically, for the start of operations, there you just see this swarm of blue going over the border and into Iraq in a couple of different areas. And,
wow, that gives me goosebumps.
Oh,
thinking of that.
Yeah, it was quite surreal to be standing there watching this piece of history unfold, and we were only, I can't remember exactly how long it was. I want to say it was, 17. It was less than an hour, but I want to say it was less than half an hour, but I can't remember exactly how long. Where it was the first helicopter had crashed on the insertion in a dust landing and whatnot, and so you just see the military machine, right? You see the machine spool into action for that part of the contingency. And it had been prepared for and briefed, and it was almost, I wouldn't say it was a certainty, but it was a high likelihood that a helicopter was going to crash as part of an so with that many helicopters involved in different parts, and with everything going on, it was absolutely something to be prepared for. And so when it happened, everything just started in motion for all the pieces that needed to happen to support that event, and to be able to keep other parts of the machine moving, and away it went. And just being there for the next how many hours, observing, obviously my role to play in that, but watching the icons come across the screen was just one of those moments where you realize just how big some of these events in history have been. Then I guess jump to Afghanistan, and some of the missions that we did over there were there were some that were. It's the thing with deployments. Sometimes you're just bored. In all honesty, sometimes deployments, as dangerous as they are, sometimes they're really boring, and then there's interrupted by moments of sheer terror or whatever else going on, and all deployments have that to a greater or lesser extent, and it just depends on what role you've got as to what kind of ratio that is sometimes. But again, that over in Afghanistan, one of the things that I used to remind our people of over there was there was an old fort, or the remnants of a fort, that was allegedly built by Alexander the Great, and I reminded our team over there a couple of times. I put a picture of it up on the screen, or I'd talk about it, and so this fort here apparently built over 2,000 years ago, and this country has been at war with themselves or with other people the entire time throughout history. And so if we think we are changing the course of history in our 6-month deployment here, then we've got another thing coming. And It's not to say that we won't do our best, and it's not to say that we won't give it everything we've got, but no individual action here is going to change the course of history for this nation. This is a generational issue that needs to be addressed, not something that 1 or 2 or 20 of us or 1,000 of us are going to change in the course of our 6-month deployment. And again, that just really hit home for me. Again, scale and the size of the historical events that we've been involved in, and the, quite frankly, minuscule nature of our part that we play. We have a very important role to play from a military, national, strategic perspective. But at the end of the day, we need to make sure we keep our thoughts and understandings and beliefs about that in check somewhat. That said, yeah, we absolutely got into a couple of missions over there that were pretty exciting. There was one that main one that I talk about. We took our 2 Chinook helicopters and in the middle of the night landed either side of a Taliban compound, so that we 12-foot high earthen walls around the compound, and we hadn't seen the compound before, so it's middle of the night vision goggles, come in and land, and it's just dirt on either side, so we're completely browned out in dust, so we couldn't see the ground when we're still about 15 feet above the ground, and got the aircraft onto the ground. Our blades are only about 10 meters away from the compound walls.
Wow.
Really, really tight, and a very close assault. And running on the ground for 40 seconds as 35 troops ran out the back of each aircraft and directly into the firefight. As soon as the last one's off the ramp's coming up, we're back onto the instruments inside, and it's completely hand flown, right? There's no autopilot flying. This is completely hand flown. And back onto the instruments and come up through the dust cloud, which is about 200 feet height now, 200 feet high now, pop out the top of the dust cloud and roll down to our staging location at Tarankout. And from there, we could see through our night vision goggles the explosions and everything going on. And we could hear on the radios this firefight getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And we were meant to go back and pick them up after 40 minutes. And anyway, 40 minutes turned into an hour and a half and 2 hours. And again, we can just see it getting bigger and bigger. And one of the pilots from another aircraft came over and he said, "Hey, boss, we better not be going back up there. That's getting way too dangerous." And I said, "Mate, I know it is, but there's 70 men up there that need our help. There's 70 men up there that we put in, and we're the only way they can get out. So when they call, we're going to go and get them." And how to his credit, he went back to the aircraft, and another half an hour went by, and the call came in for the extraction. We started up and we took off. And as we departed Tarankout, then the world basically went blank. And the reason he was concerned about going back up there, and rightly so, was not just that the fighting was really fierce and intense, and it was, but because we'd been waiting so long, the moon had now gone down. And the way night vision goggles work is that they magnify ambient light. They don't generate their own light. And so with no moon, and because it's gone down, there's no starlight because it's overcast, there's no ground lighting because we're in the middle of Afghanistan, like the goggles are all but useless. And it was now illegal for us to fly. And, but anyway, we said, I said, we need to go. And so we did. And both crews were absolutely in for it. And so as we flew in, one of the Apache escorts, it copped some rounds, so it had to return to base. And we got a radio call to say that the enemy knew we were coming back and that they were setting up an ambush and that we shouldn't attempt the approach. And that was ignored by both crews. And so we continued the approach, and we found out afterwards there were rocket-propelled grenades going under the aircraft and over the aircraft. As we came into land, again, we got browned out with dust so that we couldn't see the ground. And managed to get, and as we landed, just all hell, all mayhem erupted all the way around the aircraft. And very grateful to say that there was not only the assault force that we inserted by helicopter, but also an Australian commando platoon that was on the ground with 7 vehicles, and they'd sort of set up a horseshoe that we landed in the base of. And so they were putting up as much protective fire as they could to help us get in and get out. And so, yeah, managed to get all the assault force on board and got up and got out of there, and somehow not a bullet hole, not a scratch on either aircraft. But that the other aircraft that now had 40 people on board very, very nearly flew into the ground on the way home because of quiet conditions.
Yeah.
But we managed to get back to Tarankout, and people ask me, wow, did you get in trouble for breaking the rules and whatnot? And thought, well, yes, I did, and no, I didn't. And it's not a decision that I took lightly to knowingly break the rules, because these rules are written for good reason, right? Because we go flying around without appropriate lighting or illumination, I should say, without enough illumination. And you are absolutely in serious risk of flying into something. And, but in this case, the topography and the reason we were doing it were well and truly worth the risk. Got back to Tarankout, and there was a wounded soldier on board the other aircraft who we needed to get to medical attention. And the assault force wanted us to go back to a different base back in Kandahar. And I had to say no. So, and I said, why? And I said, because the conditions were just at that horrible point where it's too dark but too light. It's too dark to fly without night vision goggles, and it's too bright to fly with night vision goggles. And there's some big hills that we need to go through that are only, 15, 20 minutes away. And so sorry, but for one wounded soldier, I have to say no to this one. Give us 15 minutes and then we'll be right. We'll take off and we'll go. And so there's, every single moment, it's not about bravado. It's not about, just the cavalry charge. Every single moment is assessed and risk managed and looked at the relative merits, pros and cons of, do we do this or don't we do this? And so there's the space of, within the space of half an hour, go charging into a gunfight, but then no, we're not going to go flying in the hills. And so that, I guess, is indicative of the kinds of, rapid fire decision making and the consequences of the decision making. And, when it comes to Afghanistan, before we deployed, a number of people were saying, your highest risk over there is going to be surface to air missiles, right, against the aircraft. And I said, you've got it wrong. You've got it completely, utterly wrong. That the highest risk of one of our helicopters crashing is actually us, the aircrew. It's us as humans making the wrong decision or making the right decision too late, because of the fatigue and the operating altitudes and the extremes in temperatures and all of the other environmental factors that go into operating in that environment. If we can make sure that we can accommodate for all of that, then we'll have a look at what the tactics and the weapons and the bombs and the bullets and the rockets and see what those problems are going to cause us. But, in terms of what's the thing that's most likely to cause an aircraft to go down, it's actually us as humans, because we are the most fallible element.
In life, obviously, in a lot of professions, obviously sometimes it's not as life and death as kind of your role, but people have got to make decisions, and there'd be people listening to this episode that work in high pressure positions, whether it's in corporate or organizations, anything, first responders, maybe even in the defense as well. What did you most learn through that time around making those decisions in those, kind of pressure cooker, scenarios?
Yeah, a few different things. One is, and when I say I learnt these things and these couple of lessons I'm about to say, it doesn't mean that I got it right every time. I certainly don't put myself out there as some exemplar leader, who, I say these things and that's because I did it perfectly every time. Rubbish. It's because these are the lessons that I learned the hard way. Right.
Yep.
And I guess the first lesson was push decisions down as low as they can be made. So empower people to make their own decisions whenever and wherever possible. And one of the ways to enable that is to be really clear about your intention and in the military, we call it intent. What is the commander's intent? In other words, what's the big picture? What's the long range aim and forecast? What's the long range aim and outcome that we're actually seeking here? And so when everybody's really clear on what the long range outcome is, then it doesn't matter if you're approaching it from here or from here or from here or wherever the case may be. If we all know where the North Star is effectively, what's the outcome, what's the end intent, then everybody can play their little part to help the bigger whole work towards that. And so the lower decisions are made, then the faster you'll be able to get to that end state. Because you don't have one person becoming a bottleneck.
Yep.
And so with that, only raise up the need for a decision when you don't have the authority to make the decision yourself, because there are some things where they don't have the authority, but also where you don't have the if you just you don't believe you have enough information to be able to make a sound decision for the bigger picture. So that would be number one, is decisions as low as possible, empower the team wherever possible. And part of that is, and I can't remember the language here. I've got to find it again. But essentially, there's type 1 and type 2 decisions. I think somebody coined a phrase around these. Type 1 decisions are things that are really, really difficult to change. They have a big impact, and they're really, really difficult to change. Versus type 2 decisions are things that are important, but they're relatively easy to turn around just in case you need to. And everybody should be making type 2 decisions as low as possible. But still make type 1 decisions as low as possible as well. From there, and I can't, have I gone off track? I'm just thinking I started.
No. So first was obviously lower decisions, like decisions in the lower end. And then you've obviously stepped on to number 2, which was, your type 1 and 2.
Yeah. And then from there, it kind of jumps when it comes to decision making to, don't expect everyone to be happy with every decision that you make, and don't take it personally. And, because we don't necessarily have all of the information ourselves. As I said, when you got the intent, when you got the end state, that helps to narrow people's focus. But it still doesn't mean you're going to get the right decision every time. And there are at times when there's personal agendas or personal preferences at play, and you need to be mindful of that. Don't try to play to that. I'm not a fan of people playing to personalities at all. But at the same time, just be mindful that they exist. And then if you do end up getting a rap over the knuckles, then have the courage of your conviction, explain why it is, whatever happened, blah, blah, blah. At the same time, also be able to take it on the chin and don't take it personally. And if the boss tells you, no, we're going to change and do it this way, then okay, salute proudly and carry on with the new way. That said, one of the other things I've learned, and it's particularly relevant in the civilian world, right? And it's understanding the difference between leadership and followership. And I personally think that leading in the civilian world is way more difficult than leading in the military.
Why's that?
Oh, absolutely it is. It is absolutely far more difficult to lead in the civilian world. And it's simply because in the military, we have the authority of command. So we actually have a legal authority that allows each rank and certain positions within each rank as you go up to have legal authority over their subordinates to command them to do X, Y, or Z. And the subordinate has to do it because that's the way the rules are, right? Now, in the civilian world, and I've seen this first case myself a couple of times, you get there as the leader, as the manager, and you say, okay, guys, we're going to go and do X, Y, Z. And a couple of people nod and a couple of people look across the table and say, no, I'm not. Right. Okay. Why not? No, because I reckon that's crap. Because I reckon that's rubbish. Because no, I've seen that before and it doesn't work. All the different reasons come out. And so talk about needing to influence people. Talk about needing to actually lead people. And leading is very different to commanding. And so definitely learnt this the hard way a couple of times in the civilian world. And so where this is going is to understand the difference between leadership and followership. There isn't really the need for followership in the military, but in the civilian world, there is absolutely the need for followership. Followership does exist in the military, but it's really, really prevalent and really needed in the civilian world. And followership, there's there's a model around followership, and basically it goes everything from being a sheep, just a yes man who doesn't think at all, has no thought of their own, but just yep, okay. And sure, they're great. They will blindly follow you and do everything that you ask them to do, but they're not really value adding in any great way. And then there's a deliberate obstructionist, and then there's someone who's deliberate obstructionist, and someone who's thinking for themselves and just wanting to keep saying no. And then you got someone else who's wanting to think for themselves, and they play they're happy sometimes, not happy other times. They're a bit of a swing voter kind of thing, all the way through to someone who is, for all intents and purposes, a leader. For all intents and purposes, motivates the team, influences the team, is a self-starter, is a self-thinker. When you ask them to do something, they will absolutely think through the intent and go, what's the best way to do this? And how can I support the boss in the best way? And blah, blah, blah. And so that's, the highest level of followership. And as the leader, you need to be able to identify all these different types of followers and understand, how do I connect with these people in a way so that when we're making decisions, I can get them to make decisions at the lowest level, and I can get them to support my decisions. And so that I can have influence, and I can lead these people to what we need to do and what we need to achieve. So yeah, a bit of a sprinkling, a whole raft of different.
Before we get back into the episode, from time to time you might have a burning question, a guest recommendation, a comment, or some feedback, which I always appreciate. If so, I'd love to continue the conversation after this episode, so let's connect. I'm easy to find, but the best place to engage and connect is on Instagram, @TheSteveHodgson. But that's enough from me. Let's get back into the episode.
Some great insights and some great advice there for leaders listening, or anyone really listening around, where they're working with an organization, whether they're leading an organization. I think that's some really great insights there. I wanted to ask, obviously, and we'll get back to your story now, around that rock bottom moment. I suppose, there's a service and there's a massive sacrifice for people that work in the military. And I think a lot of people don't understand that. I've got friends that have been in the military. I know friends that can't work anymore because they severe PTSD, mental health, the trauma of battle. And it is there's the battle on the battlefields, but then there's the hidden battle that they bring home, right? The hidden battle that sits behind, as you say, that proud person. So, talk to me about what did you start to see, or what were some of the signs that when you look back were probably warning signs that you probably could have maybe sought help earlier?
Yeah. So, for me, I did seek out some help earlier.
Okay.
And, I guess so if I go right back, so the start for me that I completely didn't recognize what it was at the time, was after I was home from my first deployment to East Timor, which was, quite innocuous, really. Nothing really happened. And going into a shopping centre here in Brisbane to get a loaf of bread, and what seemed like a flood, as you go through the big double glass doors, what seemed like a flood of people came towards me. And I just flattened myself against the glass shop front, like literally just threw myself out of the way. And I remember almost looking at myself going, what's going on with you? Like, what's happening there? And not being able to answer, like just having no words, no clue what was happening. And the flood of people eventually turned to a trickle, and I peeled myself off the glass, got a loaf of bread and ran away. And I didn't tell my wife, I didn't tell my mates, I didn't tell anybody about that, because I was just completely confused. And I now know that was a panic attack. But I don't remember racing heart. I don't remember sweaty palms or anything. It just happened like that so quickly. And, but at the time, just no understanding around what that was. And then come through to 2003 after the deployment to Iraq, and I waking in the middle of the night, and this is where the bullying and the interpersonal and the toxic culture, all that kind of stuff really came in. And I'm waking in the middle of the night after I got back from that deployment. My wife lying next to me, and I'm screaming and crying, and I turned to her and I said, "Am I normal? What the hell is happening to me?" And but again, being messed in the head was career termination for the ADF, so I certainly wasn't telling anybody at work. And so that was the start of me asking my wife, Megan, to keep it a secret, right? And so that was 2003, and that was when I knew something wasn't right. And then there was some more bullying at work and whatnot, and to the point where I actually couldn't raise my hand in public to ask a question because I'd literally chest poked and abused and whatever else about not asking a question. Interestingly enough, and and then come through to 2007 in Afghanistan, and I'm just continually angry and frustrated, and is that the stress, the workload, again, a couple of key individuals deployed in Afghanistan as well as back in Australia, just making my life an absolute living misery, and I got to the point where I was addressing down, talking to a young officer, and I realized they weren't looking at my face; they were looking at my hands, and my hands were just shaking like crazy. And I couldn't stop them. No matter how much I tried to stop my hands shaking, I could not stop them. And that was when I really knew the game was up. And so when we leave operational deployments, we fill out these forms, for psychological screening, and then we go and have a chat with a psychologist. And I had a chat with the psych, and I fessed up for what was going on for me and said, I need help. I need to see somebody. And unfortunately, it was another 3 months until I got to see a psychologist after I got home. And the two of us just did not gel. We did not gel at all. And I said, I'm done with this. I'm not going to bother any more psych work. And I just thought, if this is the best the Army can do, and this is the best that psychology as a field can do, then I'll do it myself. Thank you very much. I'll just take care of it. And so I started hitting the bottle. And so that was, there's a couple of little flags in there so far, but I'll tell you what, when I was smashing the bottle every afternoon, then, and I wouldn't finish till the bottle was empty, whatever the bottle was. And it just one afternoon after the other. It's like, oh my God, look back now, it's so out of character. But at the time, that was just the numbing that I was doing. And of course, abusing alcohol, sleep was terrible again. So night terrors really started kicking in. Same individual from a few years earlier. I was back in the same working environment again. And so just the bullying at work really started picking up. I had 3 kids under 8. And, lots of noise and mess and everything else at home around that. And I had a fuse that was this short. And so that was the last thing that I wanted to be around. And so I didn't want to be at work, and I didn't want to be at home, and I didn't want to be awake, and I didn't want to be asleep. I didn't want to be anywhere. And I thought, you know what, I don't want to be anymore. And that was when I seriously started looking at different ways to end my life. And then, when it came to it, Monday morning at home laying papers, and no matter what I was doing, I'm a fairly handy guy, out in the yard and in the house and all the rest of it. But no matter what I was doing, it was not working. And the less job I did, the more I told myself how much of a poor job I was doing. And I told myself that, the weaker I felt, the worse job I did, the more I told myself. And so this cycle started, and it accelerated just so quickly. And before I knew it, I'm saying to myself, now's the time, do it. Now's the time. And it just came out of nowhere. But in that moment, even though I knew it was not rational, in that moment, it seemed so plausible, so reasonable, so rational, that, I've tried all these other things and this isn't working and they don't care and this isn't working now and I'm just useless and I'm done. I've had enough of trying. And, and so that was the thing that really scared me, I guess, quite a bit at that time, was how quickly out of nowhere that little voice appeared for me to, now's the time, do it. And
so tell me, what was the voice that snapped you out of it, that stopped you from doing it?
That was my kids and my wife. And then after that, the emergency services. And I just said, man, I can't do this to them. I can't do this to them. And so that was when I just collapsed. I had nothing left in the tank, and it just collapsed.
And what did the road to recovery and your kind of reinvention, re-identity, what did that look like over the years ahead?
Yeah, one word: roller coaster. It's the simplest analogy I can give people. Think back to the very, very first time you ever rode a roller coaster. Whatever age you were, back to the very first time you rode it. Standing in the line, there's some trepidation and some excitement. You get into the car and you start going ahead and you're going up the slope again. There's building excitement now, but there's still some trepidation and fear. And before you know it, you're off the other side, and then you're upside down, back to front. You're doing 100 miles an hour, and you don't know which way the next turn's coming. You just want to get off. That's what recovery was like. So psychologists, psychiatrists, psychologists, GP, a bunch of different support, professional clinical support. And throughout throughout 9 months it was, until I got back to work. And there were still times during that 9 months, it's kind of tapered off, where I found myself crying in the corner, where I was abusing alcohol, where I was wanting to end my life, just the highs and the lows. But before too long, the good days were outnumbering the bad days, and the staying away from the alcohol and blah, 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 and getting out, going for a run and whatnot. So, all these things started coming together to get me back on track. And one of the big things, though, as a part of the recovery was, and I didn't realize the enormity of what I started doing. But I'm a fairly visual guy, and every time I was thinking of me, the image I had in my head was me convulsing on the ground. And like, man, I need to get rid of that out of my head. I need to see something else. And so I went looking for something that I could replace that image with, and actually went right back to my teenage days and remembered the $6 Million Man, the TV show from the 70s and 80s. And for those who aren't aware, TV show, the guy was a US Air Force pilot, became an astronaut, had a horrific accident, should have died, but they rebuilt him with bionic technology, as it was known back in the day. And I just loved that show as a teenager, loved it. Couldn't watch it enough. And I decided I was going to become the $6 Million Man. So I decided I was going to put my head on his body in an image in my mind. And for those people who remember, do you remember the mantra that he had, Steve?
I don't.
Okay. So the $6 Million Man, the mantra that went with it was, we have the technology, we can rebuild him, make him better than he was, better, stronger, faster. And I just started saying that to myself again and again. Yeah, I have the technology. I'm going to rebuild me. I'm going to make me better than I was, better, stronger, faster. I'm going to rebuild my brain. And I just, didn't matter where I was, the psychiatrist waiting room, the going for an ice cream with the kids, going for a run, getting a loaf of bread, putting a nail in a wall to hang a picture, whatever it was. I just go, I am the $6 million man. I have the technology. I can rebuild me, blah, 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 blah. And I would see the $6 million man, my head on him, running along or whatever it was. And I honestly lost count of the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of times that I did that throughout the 9 months. And then after that, when I got back to work, so I went back to work on a return to work program of 2 days a week, and then built that up 3, 4, 5 days. The other part that I didn't realize, though, well, I was consciously aware of it, but I didn't realize the impact of it, was that even though I got back to work, and I had an empathic boss, a great guy, I was determined to get back to work and be functional again. And so by that, I mean, I did all the work around the head, cognitive behavioral therapy and visualization and, all this kind of stuff. But I didn't work on anything from the head down. And I found out across the road in the aviation headquarters, I'd been labeled as damaged goods, and quote, nobody buys damaged goods. So my career in Army aviation was effectively toast at that stage. And so that's when I said to my wife, it's time for me to leave the Army, but I don't know who knows what about my breakdown, about everything else. And I don't want anybody to know, because I'm still deeply, deeply ashamed of allowing myself to have a breakdown. I want to keep it a secret. And she agreed. And so, we spent the next 7 years orchestrating and constructing our personal and professional lives so that this topic was never, ever, ever going to come up. People who used to come around to the house were no longer invited to come around to the house. All this kind of stuff. And I, as I said, deeply, deeply ashamed. And so I got back to flying, and I, became a rescue pilot and a flight instructor and a flight examiner in the civilian world. I was already in the military, but did that in the civilian world, and then a chief pilot and, director of operations and whatnot, and getting some business coaching with this incredible lady in Sydney, Michelle Duval. And it got to one point, and she said, Kevin, you're doing okay with the business goals and what it is we're looking at, but I know there's something that you're not telling me. I know there's something that you're hiding from me. So what is it? I was like, no, nothing to see here. It's all good. Go about your business. Yep, everything's fine. And anyway, and long story short, we had a coaching agreement that said we'd be completely honest and do all our homework and all that kind of stuff. All the coaching finishes, done, gone. And she said, okay, Kevin, one more chance. I know you're hiding something from me. Be honest, or the coaching's done. Anyway, through a bucket load of tears, I eventually released my secret. And she asked me one question. She said, have you accepted that you got mental illness and suicide, and you've had suicidal ideation in the past? I was like, nah, it's all their fault. It's all their fault. They shouldn't have done this, and that shouldn't have happened, and that wasn't fair, and that wasn't right. And she said, what if acceptance has got nothing to do with blame or guilt? What if acceptance actually has a completely different meaning? And it simply means I don't like it, want it, or condone it. It just is, it was. And it's got no more relevance now. Sorry, it's a historical fact. That's it. And it's now got no more relevance than the color of the chair or the color of the carpet. Whack. I went, oh man. She said, you know what? I can't argue with that. I can work with that. And what was brilliant about that was, by changing my understanding of acceptance, I was able to start to move forward from everything, not just above the head, the head, but below the head, and actually start to tap into my heart and actually start to tap into my gut and connect the dots between the shame that I was experiencing and the logic, brain up here. And she said, "Radio, close your eyes." And she went through everything that I had just said to her. And she said, "Now I want you to imagine that all of that just got put onto social media." I'm like, whoa, burst into tears again. No way. No, that ain't happening. No way in the world. And she said, "Well, we need to get rid of this. And so you've got 2 months to talk about this publicly in front of a group." I'm like, "You are crazy, lady. That has never happened. No way in the world." And anyway, and a month later in this business group, there was a lady on stage talking about, blocks and what's getting in your way and being able to move forward. And she asked if anyone's got anything to say. We're like 3 minutes into this hour-long presentation, right? And I went, "Man, now's the time, now or never." And so I put my hand up. And my wife was sitting behind me, and she grabbed the person next to her and she said, "Oh my God, I don't know what's about to happen, but he hasn't put his hand up in like 10 or 15 years." And anyway, and so I stood up and spoke for honestly 3, 4, maybe 5 minutes, and just released my secret. And there's about 150 people in the room. So this is the cave that I dared never to enter. And when I finished, I'm not kidding you, the room erupted, and there were men genuinely walking across tables to get to me to give me a hug. So, "Mate, your story's just like mine. I just haven't got the guts to talk about it yet." And you've heard the phrase about feeling, 10 kilos lighter and 10 centimeters taller. I genuinely felt 20 kilos lighter and 20 centimeters taller. The world didn't swallow me up. The world lifted me up. And it was just the most incredible experience. The next day, I spent almost the entire day on the floor of the hotel room, completely energetically exhausted, like out for the count for pretty much the whole day. And so started the next version of Kevin. And I refer to that next version as KH 2.0. It was truly an astonishing experience. So,
yeah. And that's something now that you do. You're, as a keynote speaker, you're sharing these talks, you're sharing your story to inspire and to, I suppose, provide hope to people that may be, still holding that hidden battle.
Yeah, that's right. And I didn't find speaking found me. So when I did that very first thing, the lady who was running the event, she said, "Right, next month you're on stage for 20 minutes. No way. No, 5 minutes is way, way too long. And anyway, and so I did that. She said, "Right, next month, 30 minutes back on stage." And each one of these 20 minutes, 30 minutes, I was just crying and babbling and shaking like a leaf the whole time. But there was something incredibly cathartic about it, enormously cathartic. And not only that though, every time I came off stage, there would be men standing there going, "Oh my God, you just described me, mate." And it happened again and again and again. And then people come up and said, "Thank you. You just given me permission to talk about my divorce." I'm like, "Divorce? I talk about a wife that never left me. Like, where does divorce come from?" Right? And I really had no clue for the first couple of times it happened. And then I had a chat with a couple of these people, a couple of these guys, and I realized it came out of shame. These men were ashamed that their marriages failed, but didn't feel that they could talk, even with their their own extended family about it, let alone with anybody else, because of this really deep-seated sense of failure and shame. And so I was, volunteering for Beyond Blue and community groups and this kind of stuff, and I just felt it was a really good way to be able to pay forward, and if I can prevent some other poor bugger from going down the road that I went down, then geez, it's got to be worth it. And then someone come up to me and say, "How much do you charge?" And I said, "Oh, I don't. I do this for free because it's a good thing to do." He said, "Oh, I can't have you come into my workplace and do that without paying you." So anyway, one thing led to another, and now it's my full-time thing. So as a keynote speaker and now coaching and corporate development training and the like as well. So and it's just incredibly, incredibly fulfilling. I thought I would always have to wear a uniform to serve in the way that I felt worthy of being of service. But this work that I now do is every bit as worthy as a form of service, and really fills my cup, and from what I get told by other people, truly makes a difference to people's lives as well.
Yeah, it does. It's perfect. Can I ask, what advice would you give to someone that's sitting there feeling like they need to tough it out alone?
One word: don't. And then from there, it's not to say that there's plenty of other people who have been there, done that, because what's going on in your world, in your mind, it is unique to you, right? Because no one else is in your shoes. And so the exact set of circumstances that's going on for you is unique for you. And there's a legitimate fear around, someone else won't get it because this is my problem. This is my shit sandwich, so to speak, right? And but the fact is that when we believe that, and just by being able to verbalize it with someone else rather than just running it through in your own head, as I got really good at doing, and I still have to catch myself, right, when I'm doing it. But being able to verbalize with somebody else what's going on, you can sometimes start to come up with some of your own answers and actually help to start your own solutions in progress. But absolutely getting the right support, the right type of support at the right time. So sometimes, for me at the depths, I absolutely needed the best clinical support. And then from there, I still go and see a psychiatrist and a psychologist occasionally, and I still have coaching and whatnot, because they all play different roles in different ways. And as I said, a coach for me who had the right rapport with me so that she could hold my feet to the fire and really be able to almost excise this secret from me. So doing it alone is the slow road. And if you want to get through the problems, the issues that are going on for you sooner rather than later, then doing it together with somebody else, coach, psychologist, counselor, friend, is absolutely the fastest way to get there.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks for sharing that. Now, through your career, obviously success would have meant a lot of things, but how do you define success today?
Success today, it still has a number of different elements to it. And success to me, there's a financial element to success. There is also an element, and it's a fairly significant element to success, and that is to know that I'm making a difference. Know that what I'm doing actually counts for other people. The last thing in the world I want to be is a self-licking ice cream, right? I'm not going to get up there on stage and talk about things just for my benefit. It has to move the needle for other people. And so if I get feedback that I'm not moving the needle for other people, then absolutely I am not successful.
Yep, perfect. And through your life, who would you say has been your biggest or greatest teacher?
Ooh, my greatest teacher. Geez, School of Hard Knocks would have to be the probably the greatest institution. The greatest teacher, I would say, would be between two people, and they're both coaches. Michelle Duval, who I've already mentioned, and also another coach that I've had. His name's Vac Ubel, and both of them have very different coaching styles. And both of them taught me some of the most incredible foundational life lessons, understanding life type lessons that have been part of that transformation into KH 2.0, and that I still fall back on today and every day. So yeah, I'd say those two people.
Yeah, perfect. And if there was a message that we could kind of amplify out there into the world for for people that are doing it really tough now, what would you want to say to them?
Their mental illness is normal, manageable, and recoverable for the vast, vast majority of people. I know it doesn't feel like it at the moment, but it is absolutely normal. It is a normal response to some normal and some abnormal situations in life. And, you know, our brain is the most amazing supercomputer on the planet. And our brain does things fundamentally for one reason, and that is to keep us alive. And sometimes it does things often it does things in the short term, thinking that it's doing the right thing to keep us alive, but it has no understanding of the long-term consequences of us continuing to do that short-term thing. And that might be a bit of rumination. It might be panic attack and throwing you out of the way of what seems like a flood of people, right? Whatever it is, it doesn't understand that continuing to do these things and cortisol build up and adrenaline build up over time, and the detrimental effects that it has, that it's actually maladaptive. And so everything you're going through is normal. And when we allow ourselves to go, okay, this is normal, and stop beating yourself up about it, then you can actually start to make some inroads towards turning things around.
Perfect. That's the perfect way to end the episode. Kevin, I'm in awe of your journey and your story, the growth that you've come through. Congratulations, mate. Also, congratulations on, the lives that you're impacting now with your keynote talks and your coaching and your personal development. I look forward to catching up with you in person soon. For those that want to reach out to you, that want to kind of reach out and share their story or kind of get some inspiration or connect with you in any way, what's the best way for that to happen?
Yep. So a couple of different ways. You go to my website, which is my name, Kevin Humphreys, spelled REYS, .com.au, or find me on LinkedIn or Facebook. Just put in my name and keynote speaker and that'll come up. So
yeah, perfect. Awesome. Yeah. All right. Thanks, Kevin. And look forward to catching up in person soon.
Awesome. Sounds great. Thanks, Steve. It's been brilliant, mate.
Thanks, Kevin. Bye.